They are in the middle of a conversation when it happens. Maybe they are at a traffic light. Maybe they are in a parking lot. Maybe they are standing outside a building when a car rolls past, and something in the engine note is slightly different. Not wrong in a way that anyone else would notice. Not loud enough to turn heads. Just different. A fraction of a tone off from what it should be. And they hear it. They stop mid-sentence. Not because they decided to. Their brain decided for them. Something below conscious thought flagged the sound before language had a chance to form around it. And by the time they are aware of what happened, they have already begun processing, not the conversation, the car. 3 seconds later, they say it quietly, almost to themselves. That's the wheel bearing. The person next to them heard nothing, and they weren't listening for anything. They were just standing in a parking lot. But this person caught something invisible, processed it faster than thought, and named it with the confidence of someone reading a word off a page. This is not a lucky guess. This is not mechanical intuition in the mystical sense. This is something that neuroscience has a very specific and very interesting explanation for. And once you understand what is actually happening inside the mind of a person who can do this, you will never look at that ability the same way again. Begin with what the brain is actually doing in that moment. When a person with deep mechanical experience hears an engine, they are not hearing sound the way most people hear sound. Most people hear noise, process it as background, and filter it out unless it crosses a threshold of obvious wrongness. But a person who has spent years working on engines has built something inside their brain that researchers call a predictive model. A highly detailed internal map of what normal sounds like, what each component sounds like when it is healthy, what it sounds like when it begins to fail, what the difference between those two states feels like in the air. The brain is constantly comparing incoming sound against that model without being asked, automatically, in the background. The way a native speaker of a language does not consciously analyze grammar, they simply hear when something is wrong. The mechanical expert is doing the same thing. They have internalized the grammar of the engine so deeply that violations announce themselves without effort. And this is called expert pattern recognition. And the depth of it in people who truly have it is almost difficult to overstate. Here is what makes it genuinely unusual. Most knowledge that humans accumulate can be described in words. You can explain what you know. You can write it down, teach it in a classroom, pass it through language. But the knowledge that allows a person to hear a failing water pump in a passing car is not stored in language. It was never learned through language. It lives somewhere else entirely. Neuroscientists call this embodied cognition. Knowledge that is stored not in verbal memory but in sensory and motor systems. In the hands, the ears, the gut. In the particular physical experience of having been present when a bearing sounded like that, and then having opened the engine and confirmed it. Over and over, across years, across dozens of vehicles, across thousands of hours of listening while working. This is why people who have this ability often cannot fully explain how they do it. Ask them how they knew, and they will pause. They might say it just sounded off. They are not being vague. They are reporting accurately. The knowledge lives below the level of words, in a place that language cannot easily reach. Now consider what that kind of knowledge does to a person over time, because it does not stay contained to cars. A person who has spent years building that level of pattern recognition, who has trained themselves to notice the subtle wrong note inside a larger noise, does not switch that off when they step away from the garage. The cognitive habit generalizes. They become the kind of person who notices small things everywhere. The slight change in a colleague's tone that suggests something is wrong. The almost imperceptible hesitation before an answer that signals someone is not being fully honest. The detail in a plan that everyone else has accepted that does not quite fit the pattern of how things actually work. They are often described as perceptive, occasionally as difficult, because they ask the question nobody else asked, and it turns out to be the right question. They are hard to fool, not because they are suspicious by nature, but because their brain has been trained across years of physical experience to catch the note that is slightly off. This is not a personality trait they were born with. It is a skill that was built in the specific environment of a machine that would not lie to them. That last part matters more than it seems, and the engine is one of the most honest feedback systems a person can spend time with. It does not soften what it tells you. It does not adjust its signal based on your feelings or your preferences. It makes a sound, and that sound means something. And whether you understand what it means depends entirely on whether you did the work of learning. There is no social cushioning. There is no ambiguity in whether you were right. You diagnosed the sound, you opened the engine, and either you were correct or you were not. People who have spent years in that environment develop a very particular relationship with reality. They become deeply resistant to vague answers, uncomfortable with decisions made on assumption rather than evidence, impatient with confidence that has no physical basis, and they have stood in front of problems that could only be solved one way, by listening carefully and following what the evidence actually said, not what was convenient or what someone else assumed. And they carry that forward. It creates a mind that is unusually grounded, precise without being rigid, confident in its own perception in a way that is not arrogance but earned calibration. There is an emotional dimension here that almost never gets discussed. Many people who have this ability learned it in proximity to someone else. A parent who said nothing but handed them the wrench and waited. A mentor who let them listen first before explaining. Someone who believed, before there was any evidence to support it, that they were capable of figuring it out themselves. The sound knowledge and the relational knowledge arrived together. They are stored together. When someone with this ability hears the wrong note in an engine, somewhere underneath the diagnosis, there is a ghost of that original moment. The first time they heard something like it, named it, and were told they were right. This is why mechanical knowledge so often becomes identity. It was not learned alone. It was learned in relationship, at a specific point in life, in circumstances that were formative in ways that went far beyond the technical content. The ability to hear what is wrong is inseparable from the experience of becoming someone who could. Most people move through the world filtering out complexity, simplifying, generalizing, accepting the surface of things because the surface is usually enough. But some people were trained differently, by machines that did not simplify, by problems that did not resolve until every variable was accounted for, by years of listening to systems that communicated in their own language and rewarded only those patient enough to learn it. When those people walk through a parking lot and their head turns slightly at a sound nobody else registered, they are not showing off. They are not performing expertise. They are simply doing what their brain was built to do across years of honest, difficult, irreplaceable experience. The question worth sitting with is not whether you have this ability. The question is, what sound in your own life you have been walking past, every day, almost hearing, not quite letting yourself stop and name. Because you have heard it, you just have not listened yet.